Introducing you to people across North Carolina and around the world who put their Catholic faith into action. This is FaithWorks on Catholic 540 AM Divine Mercy Radio. Now, here's your host for FaithWorks, Ellen White.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. Our show highlights individuals through God's grace who put their faith into action daily. Amazing people who have an interesting, sometimes overlooked impact on our Catholic faith. On FaithWorks, we share their stories. I'm your host, Ellen White. Welcome to our monthly segment, Saints in the Making, where we explore the lives of those who lived the gospel with extraordinary faith. In this episode, we'll take a closer look at three powerful witnesses. Saint John Vianney, the humble priest of ours who brought thousands back to the faith through confession and prayer. Saint Clare of Assisi, who gave up wealth for a life of poverty and devotion to Christ. And Saint Maximilian Kolbe, who offered his life in place of another at Auschwitz. Their stories remind us that sainthood isn't just for a few, it's a call for all of us. Our guest today, as always, is Rob Agnelli, who is here to help us unpack their stories, not just to admire them, but to discover what they can teach us about becoming saints ourselves. Welcome, Rob.
It's good to be back.
And we know it's because holiness doesn't just start with perfection. Of course, it doesn't start with perfection. It starts with saying yes to God, even when the road is hard. Wow. So, several episodes in, Rob, this is number 8. I can't believe it. I want to know kind of what this has done to your own spiritual life, just discussing these saints.
Yeah. For me, what I think the sort of overarching theme, we've talked about this several times, and I think we have one of them this time, the saint stalking.
Yes.
And I think you had told me that Saint John Vianney has been saint stalking you, right? And you realize once you get to know a little bit about them, that they're actually pretty active in your life, right? And so I think my own devotion to the saints, because I've had to sit and learn about them, or just even reflect on my relationship with the ones I knew pretty well, I think my devotion to the saints has grown sort of exponentially since we've been doing this, which, praise God, is really a really cool kind of aspect of it. So what about you?
Yeah, for sure. And I just got goosebumps from head to toe. I think, and I just envisioned like that little crack that, when you invite the Lord in and you just give him just a little crack, he just blows right in. And it's the same with the saints when our eyes are opened to these particular saints and how they lived their life while they were here on earth. And then you start seeing their name, you start seeing, it's just amazing. So that little crack relates to the lives of the saints as well, and how they can help us on our journey here, which is what they're called to do, and that's what they want to do. Okay. They want to help us, so we just need to be open to it. All right, yeah, so St. John Vianney, the first one that we're going to discuss now. Wow, what a powerhouse. And he wasn't recognized as a saintly man when he came into the priesthood, or just by his very nature. So let's talk about him. Tell us a little bit about his early life and family background.
Yeah, so he's born right before the French Revolution, so tumultuous times. His parents were pious, so he's born May 8th, 1786, and he's baptized the same day. And his parents were pious and sort of had a special love for the poor. They were a farming family. So he was sort of schooled in hard work, which later on sort of manifests itself in his life, and also in his sort of tenacity with his vocation, because he sort of had to fight for his vocation. But he, from his youth, was also very pious. He would often be found at like 4 or 5 praying. He had a special devotion to his guardian angel as a child, and so he would often go off in solitude. As often farmers and shepherds do, and sort of be found praying to his guardian angel.
Gosh, there's so many things that you just said there. He had to fight for his vocation to the priesthood. And early struggles with recognizing hard work. That is so huge. I think that really resonates with me, especially in the culture that we live in. Things are kind of handed to us, and we don't have to work hard necessarily for what we acquire. So there's a message there. And also with having to fight for what he knew he was called to do, there's so much to that. When we have to fight for something, we're more inclined to stay focused on it and be driven towards it. So I think there's a lot to reflect with that. The French Revolution. Wow, it really impacted his life for sure. How did he first feel the call to the priesthood?
So, I mean, in the midst of the French Revolution, so one of the things about him is that he had tremendous priest role models in his life. Mm-hmm. And so one of the fruits of the French Revolution was that the churches all closed. And so you would have these sort of closet priests that would travel around, and they would stay in families' houses. And for him, a priest was a hero, mm-hmm. right? Who was putting his life on the line to bring the sacraments to people. So he meets these fervent priests very early on. And, as a young man, of course, he's looking for a hero to emulate. And so he finds it in priests. And that's a sort of a theme of his young life, where he would meet these just tremendous priests. But I think what it also did to him was made him value the sacraments. So, like, for instance, his first communion, he had two nuns who were in hiding that were preparing him for his first communion, right? And so he knew the value of the sacraments, right? And you see that spill over into his priesthood. So he never, like to your point about working hard, he never took the sacraments for granted because they were sort of taken away from him at a young age because, there weren't always priests around. And so for him, like his vocation was clear because he wanted to be a hero and he wanted to emulate these men. And then like later on, after the church is open again, he has a priest that's in the next town over that starts this minor seminary. And this priest really invested a lot in him because of the French Revolution. He wasn't well educated. He kind of missed out on all his education. Right. And this priest spent a lot of time educating him to try to get him caught up because he knew that St. John had a vocation. And so he saw in him. And the thing that, like, throughout his life that always kind of redeemed him, because, you talk about, it wasn't like he was stupid, but he wasn't the best student, right? Mm-hmm. And that was an obstacle to his priesthood. Mm-hmm. But what always people came back to, whether it was the vicar general or this priest, or even later on, his bishop, once he's a priest, is this is a holy man. And so they would always look at his piety first, which is what they probably should have been looking at anyway, and not his education. And that just stemmed, from the fact that he had to sort of, he had to really grasp at his vocation and hear God's call, because in his mind, he's really putting himself on the line for it.
Yeah, you're talking about how he had difficulty with his studies because of the French Revolution and his lack of a proper education. I never heard it that way. I was thinking more along the lines of, like the dumb ox, that he just didn't have the intellect or the ability, but it was because of his educational experiences.
Yeah, I mean, it's very clear that, he is not, he's not St. Thomas Aquinas. Right. But he's not a dummy either. Right. He just... learning a language like Latin in your 20s, when most of the people are learning it, when they're 10, 11, 12, it was difficult. Mm-hmm. And so, like, they would adapt some of his education where he would get it in French, like he studied philosophy in French, and he didn't necessarily have trouble with that. But it was really like the basics that he missed out on. Oh, okay. That really kind of, and he did not have the best memory. And that's why if you read his sermons are very simple, like really, really poignant, very to the point. Yeah. But he couldn't remember like complicated things to put into a sermon. Yeah. And so he would just speak very simply.
There's a book, and I mentioned this before, and I don't have it with me, so I can't say exactly what it is, but it's basically Coached by the Curé. There's a series of books by Scepter Publishing that takes the place of, it's presented in a way that these saints would be coaching you. So I did, St. Joan of Arc we mentioned before, and the curé of ours, St. John Vianney, and it is incredible. So it's as if they are teaching you leadership qualities, or whatever it is. And I can't remember the premise behind the book, but humility, just accepting the experiences that you're going through, and focusing on St. John Vianney's strengths, his virtues, and how to emulate those in your own life. Incredible book, coached by the curé. Okay, so let's, I want to jump around a little bit, and let's talk about his own struggles and spiritual growth, and then we'll come to his own saintly qualities and his mission. As we talked about, he did struggle with his seminary studies, but how did he persevere through that? What was it that...
if you were to ask him, he would say it was Our Lady. So
good old
he
Our
was
Lady.
really, really struggling, especially with the Latin. And so he essentially prayed to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and then made a pilgrimage to St. Regis, who was a French saint whose relics were nearby. And he had far less difficulty after he did that. So I think he, I can't necessarily confirm this, but I would say that he probably put his priesthood in the Blessed Virgin's hands, and she took over. And so I think once he did that, people were willing to cut him some academic slack because of his holiness. But also the other thing too, that everything he did with prayer and fasting. Right. So it was the whole person involved in it. And I think that's, we already mentioned the fortitude and sort of the perseverance that comes with the hard work of farming. But I also think he was always willing to sort of put his body on the line to be fully into what he was doing.
You talk about farming and prayer and fasting, and I can't help but think, I cannot remember who said this to me, because I think that we can have a tendency to think we just need to pray and do a novena and, prayer and fast, and then God will take care of it. But we have our own responsibility in conjunction with that. And the expression that I heard that I will never forget is, if you're leaning on the shovel and you're praying, you're not actually doing what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to, pray and fast, and also use the shovel.
Yeah.
So we are part of this work. And he, especially with his farming, I thought that was pretty funny. All right. So spiritual or demonic attacks. I know that he experienced them. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So for him, I think he saw the spiritual battle pretty clearly, like what the priest is, and what he's supposed to do. And so, I remember there's a story where a priest had come to him and it was like, how are you getting all these conversions? And he said, well, he said, our Lord said certain demons can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. And so once he saw the battle clearly, I think the devil decided that there was no use in hiding. And so he would sort of openly manifest and attack him. And of course, and it was, like the devil's very petty. And so he would do very petty things, like keep him up at night, make cat sounds, knock on, just constant knocking. And it was mostly to throw him off his game. And at one point, I think St. John realized that the nights that were particularly rough was the day that somebody was coming the next day for confession. So I think what ultimately, right, is that he understood the power of confession, right? And this is good for us to understand too, like how powerful confession is as a weapon against the devil, right?
That's such a great point.
For him, he wouldn't necessarily perform exorcisms. He would take someone into the confessional.
I just heard, actually, and you clarify this if you've ever heard this before, correct me if I'm wrong, that one confession is like equal to 10 exorcisms?
I mean, that's probably, I don't know if you can equate them, but so a confession is a sacrament, right? Objectively,
yes.
right? And a exorcism is a sacramental. And so, the sacrament of confession is going to be more efficacious.
I like that. More efficacious.
Yes. And that's not to say like some people don't need both.
Right.
But the point is, for St. John and for us, we should realize that what confession does is it gives the devil no room to work in your life.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's why, if you want to avoid needing an exorcism, like go to regular confession. And I think that's ultimately like why the devil targeted him, was because he understood that. He understood how powerful a confession was.
I mean,
because
hours and hours.
Yeah, most of his miracles are miracles of conversion, right? And they almost always happen because he would preach a sermon and, hundreds of people there would be moved to go to confession.
Let's back up a little bit, because I think it's important that we talk about the little parish that he was sent to and why. What was the reasoning behind it? It was way out in the middle of nowhere. There weren't very many parishioners there, if any. So let's talk about that a little bit. Tell me.
Yeah, so when very shortly after he was ordained, the pastor in Ars died. And so the vicar general sent St. John there with a warning that it was pretty much really lukewarm. People weren't coming to Mass regularly. And so the story goes that when he experiences the indifference right away, he goes there and he walks into the town and there's nobody there to greet him, and he can't even find the church. And there's a famous statue of him, like there's a child beside him and him pointing. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
No.
And it's essentially, St. John said, "You have shown me the way to the church. I will show you the way to heaven."
Oh.
And it's a good indication of what he saw, because what he did was, rather than to just go into the parish and say Mass, he decided he was going to go out to the people, and he'd walk in on their noonday meals, just have conversations with them. And eventually he would build trust with them. And then he'd slowly sort of move towards supernatural discussions. And then he'd get them into confessional. And then they were showing up. They wanted to be around him. And so they came to Mass on Sunday.
You said that they recognized early on his piety, right? But do you think, were they doing this because why this place? And even though
I think why that place was, well, one, because it opened up, but two, the other priests didn't necessarily like him. I think there's probably some envy there, and he still had to walk around with the ignorant country priest,
right?
And he was all too happy to play the role. I think there's one point where the priests were really upset because he's stealing their parishioners, right? Like these people are going, a long ways off to go to Mass with him. And so they started a petition, these priests, to send to the bishop that he's ignorant and he shouldn't be he shouldn't be a pastor, and he signs it. He signs it, and of course, like the bishop immediately is like, okay, forget this. Like, but the bishop did test him, but nevertheless, I think it's the label of ignorance really he carried around, and he didn't mind wearing it because it was actually to his benefit. It was probably that he was able to sort of, it was very off-putting, right? So people are like, oh, like he's fine. Like, he's just this humble, sort of ignorant guy, nothing really going on. And then suddenly there's this tremendous depth underneath.
Wow, it's so amazing. I love that about him. All right. So what can we learn from his humility and hidden sacrifices? What do you think?
What he used to do, which I think is amazing, is he would assign penance to his penitents, and he would do them with them. So again, this idea of putting sort of skin in the game, not only for his own vocation, but for everybody else. And I think that's what he reminds me of is just the power of that, right? The power of when you are willing to help other people carry their crosses, when you are willing to take your sacrifices and unite them with Christ, and they become unbelievably powerful, right? But you've got to be willing to make those sacrifices.
As
right?
a priest, you mean,
as
or
a priest,
anybody.
yes, but even us, right?
Yeah.
Like,
right.
Like the first thing that when we see a problem ought to be like, what kind of sacrifice can I offer? Like, how can I get access to the blood of Christ? so that it can be directed where I think it should go. And one of the ways we do that is sacrifice. Right?
And, Father John Ricardo, who is no stranger to Catholic radio, and we play his things on Thursdays and Friday mornings from 8 to 9. He's a powerhouse of a priest. But he's said many times, I wish the people that were, couldn't get out of bed because of sufferings that they were experiencing, or, in nursing homes, I wish they recognized the power that they had in uniting their sufferings for others. It's just incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and that's why like the like Pope Francis calls it like the throwaway culture, right? That's why it's so damaging, because those people don't realize the power they have, right? They have no idea. They're like, oh, I'm totally useless.
All right. So if you're just tuning in, this is Ellen White with FaithWorks on Divine Mercy Radio. And today I'm speaking with Rob Agnelli about the lives of St. John Vianney, St. Clare of Assisi, and St. Maximilian Kolbe. We are grateful for our show's sponsor, Thales College. All right. As usual, we've gone way over with the first one, and now we're going to try to do the other two. Okay. St. Clare of Assisi. What can you tell me about her upbringing and family status?
Yeah, similar to St. John Vianney, kind of grows up in pretty tumultuous times. Very early on, so the German Emperor Henry VI had died, and so the nobility in Assisi had to run, and they lost their protection, and then so her family was a well-off family. And they lived in a castle, and when they lose this protection, they have to sort of flee.
The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away.
And so they flee to Perugia. And so from a very young age, Clare realizes that, wealth and all of that is sort of fleeting, right? And so she, thanks to the example of her mother, would often sort of stretch her hand out to the poor. But also practice voluntary mortification, because as a child, she saw like this, none of this really, like this, I can have this or I cannot have this. It doesn't sort of the poverty, like living in the poverty of spirit, right? Because her family was very, very wealthy. Eventually the nobles, they were called the majors, moved back to Assisi. So she goes back into her home. But at this point, Clare so she sort of understood that the Lord was asking, something more of her. And so she promised herself to the Lord. But the problem was, like, she had some obstacles in her family because of the nobility, what they expected of her.
Okay. Wow. And St. Francis had quite an influence on her.
Yeah. So he...
What's the time frame?
Francis is about 12 years older than Clare.
Okay.
Obviously, both from Assisi. She probably met him... She was probably pretty young the first time she met him.
Okay.
But he has... he has a vision when he's, physically repairing the church in San Damiano of him building a monastery for holy virgins. But the Lord doesn't tell him who's the who the foundation stone is, right? And so Clare, when she is about 16... goes to a mission that the bishop had asked Francis to preach, and he's preaching on lady poverty, and Clare knew he was speaking directly to her. And so very, very shortly after, she meets him sort of face to face, and he realizes that, okay, this is the woman that, the Lord showed me that I was going to build the monastery for holy virgins on, and he essentially helps her get the obstacles out of the way for her to do what the Lord was asking.
Amazing. All right. So she secretly left home and joined. Talk about that transition to... Yeah,
so he moves in Lent. I think it was on Palm Sunday of 12/12. She sneaks out of the house. And her family knew she was going to do this, and so they had boarded the door, and somehow this little girl lifted the door out to get out. And so he first brings her to a Benedictine convent, and he chooses this because he knows it's going to be messy. At the time, the Benedictine convents had papal protection, so that if you were to attack it or try to, try to remove someone from it is automatic excommunication. So he brings her there, and the first thing he does is tonsure her. So he shaves her head. And then her family shows up the next day. And her uncle is sort of leading the charge, and he's pretty upset. And so the abbess at the time goes and addresses him and warns him, you need to calm down, because he's threatening violence. Eventually, he calms down, but says he wants to see Clare. Clare agrees to see him, and so they meet in the chapel. And he basically tells her, you have to come home. We've already promised you in marriage. And at that point, she takes her veil off and shows him the tonsure, and he leaves. And so he realizes, okay, this is a losing battle. And then St. Francis moves her 2 more times, and finally she ends up back in Assisi in San Damiano. And the first day she's there, her sister comes and joins her. And the uncle is back again to get the sister. And this time he's pretty violent. And so then what happens is so Clare just stops and prays. And he goes to pick the sister up, and he can't pick her up. And because she's too heavy. And then he goes to strike her, and his hand, all of a sudden, he can't move his hand. And so then at that point, he just leaves, and that's sort of the end of it. And then very shortly after, another one of her sister comes, one of her family friends, and then her mother comes to join her. So her mother looks at her as sort of this spiritual mother, right? So just this, totally transforming not just her, but her family as well.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, wow. What an incredible witness. Obviously with this, she's just totally resigned to what the Lord is doing in her life. But it's silly to even ask the question, how did she exemplify deep trust in God and a life of contemplation beyond what you just mentioned?
Yeah, that's obviously, that's part of the whole thing that, initially that she hears what God's asking, right? And so, you don't... but for her, it's very, very interesting. You don't hear a whole lot of, there's one event in her life where, the Lord actually speaks directly to her. But you don't hear a whole lot about her, having these really deeply mystical experiences. Because she had really learned how to see God's will in his providence. And so what she really wanted to do is learn how to, and teach other people how to sort of find God in the mundane. And that's, I think, part of the reason why she was attracted to poverty, because it taught her to more fully rely on providence.
And also living simply. I think that when we live simply and we're not surrounded by stuff, it's a lot easier, or distractions.
Yeah, and that's why it was so good for her at a young age to lose everything, because she realized that, in losing everything, she lost nothing. So in
her experience with the Poor Clares, what was her vision for that order, and how did that vision differ from other orders around her?
Her vision was, at the time, mostly women's religious orders were cloistered.
Okay.
And hers was to modify that. So she would say that they be enclosed, so they could leave to go out to serve the poor, or, if they had some other reason that they needed to go out. But she, very wisely, because, once you expose yourself to the world, having a vow of poverty really helps, right? And so the only thing she asked of the women is when they came, they left everything. And that, again, was unique because, at the time, for example, the first Benedictine convent that she goes to, there's still this big class division between the upper class and the lower class. And the lower class nuns are serving the upper class nuns. And she actually kind of comes to loggerheads with the abbess there, because the abbess she's like, oh, you're a noble. You need to be, with the choir, and she's like, no, I want to be like with the lowest sisters. And so it was very unique in that way, for that time period. And it takes a lot for her to get that actually approved.
He didn't come to be served. He came to serve. What a great witness. And, she had a devotion to the Eucharist, and we didn't talk about this with St. John Vianney. They both did.
Yeah.
So why do you feel like that's important, Rob? And tell me a little bit about Clare's devotion to the Eucharist.
Yeah, for her, I think, again, going back to the finding God in the normal ways, right? Like one of the normal ways we find God is through the Eucharist, right? Like we go looking for these mystical experiences, and all we really have to do is walk in and talk to Jesus in the tabernacle.
Well,
right?
that's what cracks me up when people talk about miracles that have been studied by the church and are now authorized and recognized by the church. And I'm like, we experience a miracle every time we go to Mass because Christ's body, blood, soul, and divinity is present right there in the Eucharist.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, that because of that, like it becomes almost mundane, right? Like so, you got to work extra hard to see Christ in the Eucharist.
Absolutely.
And so for her, like that's a grace, right? Obviously, but there's a story, sort of towards the end of her life, where at the time, again, sort of politically, it's tumultuous. Frederick II is the German emperor, and he and the Pope are really at loggerheads, and he gets excommunicated for the fourth time. And so what he does is basically he is going to go out throughout northern Italy and find out who's on his side. And he does that, and he finds he doesn't have a whole lot of people on his side. So he goes and hires some Muslim mercenaries to go basically attack his enemies, to go clear out the monasteries and the convents. And so these Muslim...
From Germany to Italy.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I mean, at the time, there is no sort of...
boundary.
There's no distinction, right?
Okay.
Most of northern Italy is sort of under... You have the Papal States in the middle and sort of southern part of Italy.
Oh, okay.
And then there's always a battle in northern Italy between the German emperor and the Pope.
Okay.
Right, politically. And so he sends these mercenaries, and they enter... San Damiano, where Clare is, and before they get there, Clare, this is the one time where our Lord comes to her and says, she's like, Lord, are you going to let me be handed over to these pagans? And I have all these sisters who are defenseless. Are you going to protect them? And he says, I will protect you. And so what she does is has the sisters take the Blessed Sacrament to the convent gates. She goes with them. The Muslim soldiers climb over the fence, see the Blessed Sacrament, drop their weapons, go back over the fence without harming anyone, and they leave the town. So, she saw herself as literally being under the protection of Jesus and the Blessed Sacrament. And, of course, our Lord delivered because of her faith.
And how much longer after that did she pass? Do you know what the time frame is?
It was probably about 15 years. She spent like the last probably 20 years of her life, she was pretty much sick the whole time. I don't think she left. The last 20 years of her life, I don't think she left San Damiano.
How would that be a witness of her sanctity, would you think?
Yeah, again, I think it goes back to what we talked about earlier about the willingness to suffer, right? Because there's no... She realizes she's not suffering alone, and she's not suffering meaninglessly. She's suffering with Christ and for Christ. Even if it doesn't seem to be this sort of outward persecution, she knows that Christ has sanctified all suffering, and so therefore, it becomes useful. So she just saw that as part of her vocation. She needed to be part of the poor in spirit is to be accepting of when your health is not good, right? I'm such a chronological person, and I just realized that we started with St. John Vianney, who is, born late 1700s and died mid 1800s, and then we went to St. Clare. 1100s, so late 1100s to mid 1200s. So we're jumping around a little bit, and I apologize for that. But just for reference here, I think it's important to recognize that. All right. And now we go to
Saint Maximilian Kolbe, who was when? What year? So 1800, late 1800s to mid
1942, I think is when or 1941 when he died.
Wow, what a powerful story. So tell me first about his early life in Poland.
Yeah, so this is one of this is one of those saints that has consistently kind of stalked me through my life.
Yes.
And so, I could probably, you'll probably have to cut me off at some point.
That's good.
Yeah, so he's born in 1894. Again, pious theme, pious family. His father and mother, actually after the children leave, both enter religious life. Although his father, actually, because he had a Russian passport, was mistakenly executed as a traitor.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, so again, the political mess, tumultuous time, right? So but his family had a sort of a profound devotion to the Blessed Mother. They would regularly make pilgrimages, like everyone in Poland, to the Black Madonna in Jasna Góra.
Wow, that's so incredible. And he had visions. There was a vision of the Blessed Mother.
As a child, yeah. So he apparently was, let me just put it lightly, a difficult child. He was probably, a little rambunctious. So one day he wanted a pet. And so he took some money from his mother's store and went and bought an egg. But of course, if you have an egg, you got to have a chicken to keep it warm and hatch it, right? So then he goes and places it under the neighbor's hen, which really upsets the neighbor. And so at this point, when his mother catches him, she's just totally exasperated by him, and she just doesn't punish him, doesn't do anything. She's just like, "What will become of you?" And for whatever reason, this hit his heart really, really hard, and from that moment forward, he's a totally different person, totally different man. And he later, his mother kind of is like, okay, what just happened? So she asked him a month later, what happened? And he said, well, I went and I asked the Blessed Mother your question, what will become of me? Because I was scared of what would become of me. And essentially, the Blessed Mother told him what would become of him. And in the midst of that, she offered him 2 crowns, which is he could either be a confessor or he could be a martyr. And she asked him which one he wanted to be, and he said both. Oh, wow. And so from that moment, he looks at that as his moment of redemption. Mm-hmm. And because of that, he felt like he had a debt to the Blessed Mother for the rest of his life.
Yeah. Wow,
just that powerful. One encounter with her.
So let me back up. How much longer after that did he discern a call to the priesthood? Was it immediate?
He's probably about 8 at the time, and I think he, it was probably stirring in his heart. But in his mind, he just wanted to know what the best way to serve the Blessed Mother was.
Okay.
And so he goes off to minor seminary with one of his brothers, and he decides after he's there for a year or two that this is not the best way to serve the Blessed Mother. So he decides he's going to go tell the rector that he's leaving, and he walks out of his room, and he's like, I'm just going to go in the army because that's the best way to do this.
Wow.
And he walks out of his room, and the rector's there, and he's like, hey, your mother's here to see you. And so he goes, again, talk about providence, and he goes, and his mother is like, oh, I just want to let you know your little brother's here now, too. I just dropped him off. And so he's like, I can't leave. And so he ends up staying, and his vocation is sort of solidified while he's there. And so he is ordained a priest. I think around 1917 is when he's ordained a priest, and so he goes to Rome for seminary, and becomes a priest.
He was instrumental, and in fact, I call on him a lot for his intercession for Divine Mercy Radio, because of his use of media, radio, and the printing press was just so incredible. And we have this powerhouse of a saint that was not, he was present not long ago. But how did he use the media to spread the gospel.
Yeah,
Rob?
it's funny. I think I guess we sometimes miss this, but he was like the predecessor to Fulton Sheen, right?
Yes.
Like we don't realize that this Polish priest was, Fulton Sheen kind of took his ideas and ran with them, right? Mm-hmm. And he was way ahead of his time. What he did was, to back up a little bit. So when he was in Rome, one of the days he was there, the Freemasons were marching through the streets, celebrating their 200th anniversary, and they were all carrying these signs that said, Satan must reign in the Vatican. And he really, like it, that left a profound impression on him because he knew his mother was the one who crushes the head of Satan. And so from that moment on, he had a few years before had started this group called the Knights of the Immaculata with 6 other seminarians. What he decides after that is that he's going to use that as his sort of launching point to spread the gospel. And so when he then kind of flashing forward and he sees, okay, how radio, movies, newspapers, magazines, how all these things are sort of taking off, how media is taking off, he decides that he's going to start this publication called the Knights of the Immaculata, where he teaches people about the Blessed Mother, but also, how she leads everyone to Jesus. And so he now goes and gets a printing press. He starts a city dedicated to her where they're going to do all this media. And so he really had these big plans for like how he could spread the gospel, not just throughout Poland, but throughout the world.
Just the powerful use of the media. I mean, we witness it today with the wrong use of it. And we are putting truth through the airwaves in our own little corner of the world here too. So yeah, St. Maximilian Kolbe, please pray for us and intercede for us.
What's interesting about that though is we were actually, like we as Catholics, were out in front of the media.
Yes.
And then we capitulated.
Right.
We sort of just let it go. Like we were out ahead of the movies in Hollywood. We were, like the Pope wrote an encyclical on movies.
Yes.
Right, in Hollywood. So, it's ripe for us to take it back.
Yes.
So we're not just bystanders or just like, oh, well, they give us this little bit of space on YouTube. No, like that is, God permitted media for his glory. So it's ripe for the takeover. And I think that's what St. Maximilian Kolbe realized. So he just saw it as rightly for what it should be used for.
Okay, so he's in this, powerhouse of the use of media through radio and the printing press with the work that he was doing with the Knights of the Immaculata. Take us through the process of doing that, and then, obviously showing heroic charity in the midst of that, but also even before he went to Auschwitz, and then he's taken to Auschwitz. So what happened? Walk us through that. Yeah,
so to just sort of remind, we often think about charity as like how people treat other people, right? But charity is how you love God, right? Mm-hmm. And so he didn't necessarily separate those two things. So he was constantly on the lookout for ways to sort of conquer the world for Christ. And so he's on a train and he meets these students from Japan, and he has a conversation with them. He finds out that they can speak Italian. He speaks Italian. And after he has this conversation with them, they give him these little trinkets that are like elephants or something. They were some kind of Buddhist trinkets or whatever. And he in turn gives them miraculous medals because he carried them around and he would give them to people all the time. And but from that, he realizes that I need to go to Japan. Like, I need to take Our Lady to Japan. And so that's what he does. He gets permission from his superior, and at this point, the superior doesn't even bother asking, how are you going to pay for this? Because what would happen every single time is he would go, I'm not worried about how to pay for it. That's Mary's job. And money would show up when he needed it. And so he gets to Japan, and he has no money to pay for anything, and a benefactor shows up. And so he starts out in Nagasaki, and he builds a city there for her. Very interestingly, though, what happens is there's this sort of prime real estate that he can get, or he can go a little bit out of the town behind this big hill, and he comes back and says, I want to build on the other side of that hill. And they're like, what are you doing? Like, this is prime real estate. And he's like, Blessed Mother wants me to build on the other side of the hill. And so he builds the city, and he builds a church there, dedicated to Our Lady of Fatima. And you can know where this is probably going. And they drop the bomb in Nagasaki, and guess what is completely protected by that hill?
It's Our Lady.
Yeah, the people were actually in there when they were dropping the bomb, praying the rosary. Nothing happened to them. So Our Lady was already looking out for them, and he just did what she asked.
And it's Our Lady of Fatima?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I had no idea,
Yeah, it's a beautiful
Rob.
story. It's a beautiful story, right? Like, of just doing what God's asking, and seeming crazy to everyone else. And like, I'm sure he didn't have any knowledge why he was doing it. He just didn't ask why. He just said,
okay,
like, she delivers.
I'm doing it.
So I'm doing it here.
Wow. Okay, so Japan and then Auschwitz?
Yeah,
What
so
happened?
then he ends up back in, and all along he's sort of fighting. He's having a lot of health issues. He had tuberculosis, like a lot of people at the time. And so he comes back to Poland, and they decide that he needs to stay in Poland because, I think mostly because...
How old is he at this time?
He's in his 40s.
Okay.
And so he comes back, and he becomes the head of the religious congregation back at that city, the Immaculata, that he had formed the first time. And he is starting to make himself an enemy of the Nazis, and not necessarily deliberately, but just he simply, they're annihilating human dignity, and he's not standing by and letting it happen. And he has lots of people following him, and he's using the printing press, and so he gets arrested, and he spends about 6 months with that being arrested. They let him go, and he comes back, and he finally, at this point, he gets permission to resume printing again. He prints one more issue, and they come and arrest him for the final time.
His voluntary sacrifice for another prisoner is well known. What does this? Well, tell us what happened, and then tell us what you think this tells us about his character.
So in Auschwitz, there was a prisoner that escaped, and one of the punishments that the Nazis would have is if somebody escaped, then they would kill 20 prisoners. In this case, I don't really know why they only picked 10, and one of the 10 that they picked was a husband and father, and so Saint Maximilian saw him and went up and asked to take his place, and the guard is like, why would I let you do that? And he says, well, I'm a Catholic priest. And he goes, okay, definitely. And so the way they would punish them is put them in starvation bunkers. And so he spent 9 days in a starvation bunker. And this is where his character really kind of comes out. He has this sort of great personal devotion, right? But he always elevated everyone else around him by inviting them in to his devotion. So by the end of the sort of, he has all 9 of the other men that are in the bunkers with him praying. And, to varying degrees, they're surviving. But he's literally driving the guards nuts because he's singing psalms. And so finally, after 9 days, it's him and another prisoner, and they're still praying. And even the guards are moved by it because they're like, this guy is like the real deal. And so, the head of the camp needs the bunkers because he's got more people he wants to put in them. So he just injects cyanide and St. Maximillian, and he dies.
Gosh, what amazing courage.
Yeah.
Amazing.
But some of that goes back to, right, like we've talked about this before, so he never forgot what Our Lady said to him, right, that he was going to...
The 2 crowns.
Yeah, the 2 crowns, right? And so in his heart, he was already prepared. He was prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. And so in a certain respect, he was never scared of it, right? And so we've talked about that habitual sort of being willing to be martyred, like, and understanding, like, when you're already willing to do that, no sacrifices... Like, that's the ultimate sacrifice. Yeah. No sacrifice is too great. And so he was prepared, right? And he was prepared to live that way. And when the moment came that he was ready, but it was because he constantly like on the lookout for that moment, making whatever sacrifice was necessary.
Wow. What incredible, incredible witnesses. This is amazing. All right. So St. Clare of Assisi, St. John Vianney, and St. Maximilian Kolbe. What's one small, I've asked this before, concrete step someone can take this week to grow in holiness like these saints did, even in the midst of their struggles, especially in the midst of their struggles?
I think like what the underlying theme of the three of them is love of the sacraments. Right? Like frequent the sacraments and see them as a gift, right? Like Saint Maximilian, what he would do in the camp, like if he was caught saying mass, they would kill him immediately. He said mass every day, right? He would hear confessions. He would give spiritual guidance. He would give sermons. Like those, grace is free, but it's not cheap, right? And so we can run to the sacraments. And we have such easy access to them. And look at all three of them would say, well, if you ask them why they're saints in heaven, they would say because of the sacraments. So I think we should appreciate them and frequent them.
I like that. Grace is free, but not cheap. Absolutely. Frequent the sacraments. Wow. Thank you so much, Rob. Yet again. That's a wrap for episode 8 of Saints in the Making. Thanks so much for joining us. The lives of St. John Vianney, St. Clare of Assisi, and St. Maximilian Kolbe show us that holiness is possible in every time and place. May their courage, faith, and love for God inspire us to follow Christ more closely in our own lives. If you missed any part of this episode or want to catch up on past conversations filled with inspiration and hope, you can find them all at divinemercyradio.org. Just click on local shows. And don't forget, you can take FaithWorks with you wherever you go. Just download the free Divine Mercy Radio smartphone app from your app store. Simply search Divine Mercy Radio NC and you're all set to listen anytime, anywhere. Until next time, keep living your faith boldly because faith works. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Clare of Assisi, and St. John Vianney, pray for us. God bless.